Call to order the June 15th, 2021 meeting of the Stillwater Planning Commission. As we begin, I'll briefly explain the format of our evening's meetings. We will call for items on the agenda, and we will first hear staff report, and then we'll open the public hearing, hear from those in favor of and those in opposition to the request. Normally, the applicant is the first person who speaks in favor. As you come to the podium, please clearly state your name and address for the record. After all parties have spoken, public hearing will be closed. We hear closing remarks and alternatives from staff, then there's deliberation and we finish. If we do happen to have a number of people speaking on the same topic, I would ask that everyone have the chance to hear and be heard, that you come once up to the podium and limit your speaking time to 5 minutes or so, and try not to repeat what other speakers have said. But no clapping, cheering. We don't tend to have any of those problems. But please do feel free to come forward and speak onto your topic. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. The first item on the agenda is City of Stillwater Map Amendment MA 21-04, requesting review and approval of the map amendment to rezone from Public P to Multifamily Intermediate RMI for Tract A1 and Commercial General CG for Tract A2 for future development at property addressed as 701 Boomer Lake Station Drive. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. This is a rezoning request via the map amendment process to rezone property commonly known as Boomer Lake Station. You may recall that the redevelopment plan came before you a few months ago as part of the TIF approval process. This is a follow-on action item for that. The subject properties that are being requested for rezoning are in the shaded hatch patterns. The area in green on your screen or on the screen indicates the area that is being zoned to RMI. The area in red is proposed to be rezoned to CG General Commercial. You'll also notice Lakeview, Washington, Boomer, and the surrounding major streets. This is the aerial view looking north across the west bank of Boomer Lake and across Lakeview. Again, you'll note the area in blue is the area proposed for the RMI. The area in red is the area proposed, again, for CG. You'll also notice the area in between that sticks out. This is not being rezoned at this time and will be part of basically infrastructure that is necessary and in place and will remain in place. The zoning map that you see here indicates the adjacent zoning districts. The P is predominantly for publicly owned entities like the city or the school district. The area is currently public, as noted in the staff report. It has a number of open-ended potential uses, including parks or utilities. The CG is to the west, and you can see RMI farther south. The future land use map indicates commercial along Boomer and Washington and Lakeview right at the intersection, so this rezoning starts to lend itself to that. The adjacent area next to Boomer Lake is listed as parks and open space. You can see on the close-up here those land use patterns. This is the proposed site plan to give you a rough idea of how this is being redeveloped. You can see the existing power station in an area that's not being rezoned at this time. The existing power station and some other outbuildings are being proposed for the general commercial. That's that blue area, including the potential utility easements being proposed. The RMI residential is in the green. You can see that closer to the lake. This gives you a perspective from the developer and architect about what they're proposing for the residential part, as well as some of the commercial next to it. Residential units facing onto the lake with commercial supporting it to the west. This gives you a better idea from ground level, as well as from the courtyard on the ground level, and then looking out onto the lake. And again, another perspective of the lake. And then this would be looking across Lakeview to the east from the existing power plant out over the proposed residential development. This would be lake level, of course. Any questions staff can answer? At this time, the Deputy City Manager is here also and has been involved in some of the discussions. So if there's a question planning staff can't answer, we'll defer to CMO staff.
Well, at one time, I thought that there was going to be, for lack of a better term, a beach access near this development, near the utility power station. Has it been decided not to do that?
So on this graphic, it will be hard to see, but what is listed right in here is a proposed access and utility easement. So that would give you access to the trail and potential water in this area. Anything else I will defer to the CMO staff. Other questions I can answer before I turn it over to the Deputy City Manager.
The carve-out area? Sorry.
Yes.
Carve-out area? What's there now?
There's an existing building there now that won't be part of the rezoning, but will be kept in public zoning for use by the electric utility.
Okay, can you be more specific on what that building is?
I'm going to defer.
Okay, fair.
So, Melissa Reams, Deputy City Manager. A couple of highlights. This area, well, if we get back up here. This is what we're referring to as the Chickasaw Fiber Hut. So Chickasaw years ago entered into an agreement with the city to build their fiber hut in the corner here, and it's trunk lines for the city that come in. So we have created an easement right along here to be able to move that fiber. It goes kind of at an angle here. We're going to move that over into this easement. And then we are not going to convey the land that the fiber hut sits on to the developer. It is going to stay the property of the city. This piece right here at this juncture is not going to be conveyed to the developer as well. We have a set of diesel generators that sit on that pad, and currently they are part of our capacity agreement with GRDA. And at this juncture, we're not able to move those gen sets. At some point in time, that may be an option that we have, and we will decommission the gen sets, and then we might convey that property to the developer at that point in time. Mr. Shanahan asked about the sidewalk and the beachfront. Again, that sidewalk is part of our Kamioka Trail, and it was created with federal, I think, park dollars, wildlife dollars, so that we cannot convey that sidewalk to the developer. The beach is then going to sit more along here. And again, we're not going to convey the beach to the developer, but we are entering into an agreement to create a more appetizing beach environment down there as part of the development agreement.
Have you done any investigation the exhaust from diesel generators impact on those houses, in those residential areas?
Generally, the diesel generators are only exercised periodically, and when we did need them in February, the temperatures were so cold they would not run. And so your concern is well founded, but I think with the infrequency of their running, it hasn't been something that the developer's been concerned about. But I definitely am going to make a note of it, and we will look into that as well. I think the hope is, at least from the development side, that at some point those gen sets will be decommissioned and moved, and they won't be a problem at that time.
Sure. I guess my concern is that that's a good plan, right? But then once we build houses there, you don't move generators and have to run them in the summer because of blackouts. Right? Then that might be
True, and we definitely will make a note and look into it. Any other questions I can answer? Okay.
There does not seem to be any questions.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. With that, we will open the public hearing. I'll call for those in favor of the proposal to come forward, and please again give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I'll look for any in opposition to the item. Please step forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
So as noted in the staff report, the process for rezoning property under the Land Development Code is the map amendment process, which is what's proposed here tonight. The RMI is a less intensive zoning than the CG, which would be to the south and west as proposed and exists farther toward the arterial streets. So this would be a step down toward the lake. It would allow for, that RMI would allow for multifamily dwelling as part of this redevelopment project. The additional CG zoning would be an extension of general commercial that already exists, so it would not be a case of anything new in this area. We would also note the future land use element of the comprehensive plan does note commercial uses along these arterial streets and in this area generally. Having said that, your alternatives are that you can find the request for the map amendment is in order and recommend approval the city council as requested. You can find the appropriate, that the request is not appropriate and recommend denial. But if you do feel there's additional information that you need or additional discussion, you can table the item to a date certain with notification of staff of what you would like to see for the next time you see the item. Questions about alternatives or findings? Okay, thank you.
Question? Well, thank you very much. Then any discussion and/or motion?
So I'm not great with diesel generators around 5 residential houses, but I think I would be if we could, I would like to get other commissioners' feedback, but if we did any reporting, like what the exhaust is for those generators, like what types of generators they are, maybe on the local map, something like that. I mean, is it a big ask to get a report in what, in a couple weeks?
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're asking us to come back to the next planning commission meeting and bring this back again for hearing at that point in time?
Well, only conditionally on just any kind of report of the impact of the exhaust for the run, especially in like heat. I feel like, especially for us here, having blackouts due to heat is probably much more likely than blackouts due to cold. Is that right?
Well, that's not been my experience since I've lived here in Stillwater. And really, the outage that we had in February was unprecedented. We'll keep using that word, shall we? And again, the engines, the diesel engines themselves, I can't give you years of when they were placed in service, but they are older, and we run them when we're just testing, when GRDA is coming to test for capacity, to make sure that at some point they could run, which is ironic because when we needed them, they were not. And who knew it would get that cold? I mean, really, truly, the diesel gelled and we couldn't get them to run. So I don't know if that gives you enough of a comfort level with, and if not, then I'm happy to take that back, and we definitely will come back to the next planning commission and bring you a report.
To be clear, the only time you've been called to use them was during the snowstorm?
To my knowledge, and I've been here since 2015, some of the other commissioners may have been here since then, or longer.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little off topic. The topic at hand is
The zoning.
The zoning question of zoning.
Right.
And so, you know, we have to at least, if there's information you want, then you can certainly bring that up. But the question at point for the commission to discuss is whether there's, you know, interest in accepting, not accepting, or tabling. But whether they can or cannot bring information at any given time, that's just not anything that we have at this moment. So, I mean, you can ask for it, you can, if you want to put a motion forward that says for that, we can see if we have a second and see if we can vote on that, or we can get a different thing or a discussion. So you feel like,
I feel like I'm comfortable now. Now that we've had this, now that I've gotten that feedback,
okay,
I'm comfortable with
Okay.
accepting this
And-
as written. So,
is there any other
Okay.
discussion from the commissioners or thoughts, or do we have a motion or alternative?
I move we accept the findings and recommend proposal, the map amendment for approval.
A second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept the findings and recommend approval. We will now vote by voice.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is Natalie Cornett, Eller and Dietrich PC, specific use permit, SUP 21-16, requesting review and approval of a specific use permit to allow an electronic message center sign in the Commercial General Zoning District, CG Zoning District, adjacent to a residential zoning district at property addressed as 2319 East 6th Avenue, Commercial General CG District. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Ryan Harkins, Community Development. So this is a specific use permit for an electronic message sign. This is on 6th Avenue on the east side of the community, east of Jardot. The subject property is within the hatch pattern that you see here on the screen in black. This is an aerial view of the property. It is basically a commercial strip type of building. The subject property is in that red polygon. You can see a varying array of uses surrounding this property, including residential mobile homes. This is a street view, and this is the current sign on the site. This is the proposed sign that is sitting before, or that they propose. The area at the bottom of the pole would be the electronic message sign. The zoning map that you see here indicates the general commercial zoning, and then the area to the south and immediate west would be residential mobile home. The way the land development code is written, because this is an electronic message sign proposed for a property adjacent to a residential zoning district, it requires a specific use permit. This is very similar to a case that you heard within the last 24 months along South Perkins. Future land use map indicates with the star where roughly the subject property is, and this is a close-up of the area. Future land use map indicates commercial. Questions of staff?
I have a couple of questions of staff, and I just wanted to confirm requirements for height of signs in the CG district, as well as allowable sizes of the signs, and if what's being proposed would be above and beyond what's already allowed in the CG.
So we look at this per code as 200 square feet per sign. Within the general commercial zoning district, they are allowed one sign type per street frontage per business, with the number of pole signs limited to one pole per street frontage, which is why you see multiple signs on that pole. We only measure, when we go to measure, we only measure one side of the sign as far as front facing. So that's how that is calculated. With regard to illumination, they can be illuminated externally or internally. Thank you. Mr. Gross also just pointed out that the maximum height shall not exceed 35 feet. No sign shall extend more than 10 feet above the highest point of the principal structure or more than 35 feet above ground, whichever is less. So, yep.
Other questions for staff? All right. With that, I will open the public hearing. Would those speaking in favor of the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Applicant, hopefully first, but that's this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Natalie Cornett with Eller and Dietrich, 2727 East 21st Street in Tulsa, 74114. So we're requesting the specific use permit just to get to Commissioner Phillips' questions about the display service areas. The proposed sign is 31 square feet, and the existing signs, static signs, are each 17.5 square feet. So with the addition of this sign, we'll have 65 total square feet of signage. You're welcome. The orientation of the sign, it will be oriented to be visible to the corridor traffic on 6th Street. And as you could see from, well, I think it's in your materials of how the building is situated in our commercial center, the building separates the visibility of the signage from the Crestview Park to the south. So we think with these physical conditions, really will have minimal to no impact on the residential area, and would respectfully request that you grant our specific use permit. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for I was wondering with regard to after dark and, say from 10 to 6 or something like that. These types of signs, the lumens are quite high. I mean, so yes, the building does block it from the mobile home park, but they're bright. And I was wondering if they were going to have these things turned off late at night, or how are you going to do in that regard?
So as of right now, the sign will dim and change brightness based off the daylight. They're automatically set to do that. The store hours, they close at 7 p.m. on weeknights. So if there's a time later in the evening that the sign would need to be turned off, I think that's something that, if that was a concern of the commission, we could be agreeable to that.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other question?
Right.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please step forward. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward. Give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
So currently, the Land Development Code does allow an electronic message sign in general commercial zoning. It is required to have a specific use permit if the property is next to a residential zoning district, which is the case here. The SUP that they've requested is only for the electronic message sign, just to be clear. Staff does not feel the proposed sign is going to be, since it's on the existing pole, it reduces the amount of sign clutter, and the building helps shield illumination from residential properties behind it. With that said, your alternatives are to accept the findings and recommend approval to City Council as presented. You can accept findings and recommend approval with conditions if you feel they are appropriate. You can find the request as not appropriate and recommend denial to the City Council. But if you do feel additional information is needed, you can table the item to a date certain. Questions of staff?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Discussion by commissioners. I'll speak from my perspective on lumens, and that we have had some of these lighted signs. They are very bright late at night, particularly after the businesses have closed. In general, I don't have any particular problems with them, but I do feel like 10, 11, 12 o'clock, if you drive into Stillwater, you can certainly tell where the electronic signs are, and on through the evening. So I guess my druthers would be that they're not on overnight during the nighttime hours, particularly for businesses that aren't open overnight. But that's a personal thing. But otherwise, I don't have anything particularly problematic with the sign as it is.
I'll just add, personally, I think they do their job. They certainly get our attention. The electronic signs, they are very bright. sometimes I wonder if that's a hazard or not, but I don't know that we've had any kind of issue with that, so I don't want to make up the parking where there's not one. So, and I don't know that I had actually thought about being able to have some kind of hours. Hadn't come into my mind. I do think that it is, as has been stated, that the existing building does shield the light from the residential area. So that being the case, I don't know.
Further discussion or a motion?
I move that we accept staff findings and approve the applicant's proposal.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend for approval. We will now vote by voice.
Mr. Rickelman,
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan,
Yes.
Mr. Bobo.
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda, William T. Basor, I hope I got that right. Map Amendment MA 21-05, requesting review and approval of a map amendment to rezone from Commercial General CG to Industrial Light IL at property addressed as 2817 East 6th Avenue. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a map amendment as stated to rezone property at 2817 East 6th from its current zoning of general commercial to light industrial. The subject property is in the black hatch pattern. You can see it has direct access to 6th. The aerial view here shows Highland Park Elementary, mobile home residential to the north, and then varying warehouse and other uses along the south side of 6th. This is the street view of this subject property. Current zoning map, as noted, is general commercial. You can see RTM, public, and then other general commercial zoning. This is very similar to a request that you heard at your last meeting to rezone property adjacent to this lot. This is the future land use map from the comprehensive plan. It indicates commercial along 6th Avenue in this section of the community. And this is a close-up of the area as well, indicating high-density residential behind it. Questions of staff?
Questions for staff? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll now open the public hearing. All who wish to speak in favor, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. And sir, if I butchered your name, I'm very sorry about that.
No, I am not Mr. Basor.
Okay.
I am Charlie Myers. I'm an attorney here. I'm their representative for Mr. Basor and for Mr. and Ms. Cunningham, the next two properties. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address this matter tonight. Mr. Basor and Mr. Cunningham owned companies called Audio Innovations and Q Logic for many years. And in these very properties, they manufactured at one point over 1,000 speaker boxes, stereo speaker boxes a day. This property has generally been used for manufacturing. Light industrial would be a better zoning for this property. My clients, both Mr. Basor and Mr. Cunningham, have now retired and have moved to Arizona. They still own the properties. They have attempted to sell these properties. The only prospects they've had have indicated to them that they thought this property was a light industrial and not a general commercial. When they found that there was general commercial, they lost interest because it wouldn't fit their plans. So, as Mr. Harkins said, 2 weeks ago, we came before you in a Zoom meeting, which worked very well, and rezoned 2805 E6 for a medical marijuana and grow processing facility. And Mr. Sauer is proceeding with that. These properties this one and the next two are immediately adjacent to Mr. Sauer's property. And they believe that they would be able to do something with these properties if they were changed to a light industrial.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
So currently, as we mentioned on a previous case tonight, the Land Development Code allows for rezoning through the map amendment process. The limited or light industrial is a more intensive zoning district than the current CG. There are some uses that are found in both that are permitted. There are some uses in CG that are allowed as a permitted use in light industrial. Some of the uses that have been found on this site historically can be accommodated through an SUP or other means, but again, those are a comparison of what can happen where. The comprehensive plan in the future land use element specifically calls out commercial uses along the 6th Avenue corridor. Having said that, your alternatives are to recommend approval of the request as presented. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial to City Council. But if you feel additional discussion or information is warranted, you can table the item to a date certain.
Thank you.
Questions of staff?
I see no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion and or a motion?
So, when we decided the property a couple weeks ago, there was a business plan, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and they've done all the homework, and great. What I don't like about this is that it's very open, and so we're just opening it up to any possible land use there.
Well, no, not any possible.
Any
It's
possible
light industrial.
land use, correct.
Right. But as I remember, and I was rather surprised, and I mentioned this in the last meeting, I thought it was still light industrial. Of course, I could have educated myself and looked at a current zoning map, but historically it's been used for these functions, these uses. I think it's an appropriate use. So I really don't see a problem not having a specific plan at this point in time.
I'll just say when we looked at it a couple of weeks ago, for me, it was a matter of we haven't had businesses in these buildings. We did have somebody who was interested in a business. I need to have a little bit more of the background about the businesses that have been in these particular properties that we're looking at this evening. They really kind of lend themselves a little bit more towards the IL, perhaps. The crossover between the two uses are fairly close, so basically anything already gone in a CG can still go in IL. It just opens it up to a few more things. So I don't have a lot of issue with it being zoned IL. It's really kind of be used as it has been used in the past historically as light manufacturing.
Okay. Do we have a motion or any other discussion that you would like to bring up then?
I'll move to accept staff
Accept
the right one.
Accept staff findings.
Accept staff's findings and recommend approval.
Second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff's findings and recommend for approval. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is David and Yvonne Cunningham, map amendment MA 21-06, requesting review and approval of a map amendment to rezone from Commercial General CG to Industrial Light IL at property addressed as 2811 East 6th Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is MA 2106. It's a rezoning request, again, from Commercial General to Limited or Light Industrial. The subject property in this scenario is in the hatch pattern to the south and just west of the case you just approved. This is the aerial view. Subject property is inside the yellow polygon. Again, this is looking north-northeast toward Highland Park Elementary. The zoning map indicates general commercial surrounding this site previously, as well as the other adjacent zoning districts. Future land use map indicates commercial, which the way the comprehensive plan describes commercial, it can take in a number of different uses. This is a close-up of the area. Questions of staff? Okay.
I do not see any. Thank you very much. We'll now open the public hearing. All wishing to speak in favor will please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
Charlie Myers again. My office is 711 South Husband here in Stillwater. I would just echo the comments I made to the previous piece of property and just say further that, you know, my clients wish to sell these properties to bring businesses into town. That's going to benefit the town. These properties have been vacant way too long. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
So as we've noted in the staff report, while the comprehensive plan calls for commercial uses along this corridor, some of the uses historically found in this area and on the subject parcel can be accommodated through existing zoning, but could also be accommodated through the IL zoning district. The IL is a more intensive zoning district, but again, if you look in the staff report and the comparison chart between zoning districts, you can see a number of uses that are similar. The map amendment process is how we do rezoning under the Land Development Code. Having said that, your alternatives are to recommend approval to City Council as requested by the applicant. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial, or if you feel additional information is needed, you can table this item to a date certain. Questions of staff?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would move to accept staff's findings and approve the map amendment as requested.
Second motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept findings and recommend for approval. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is David and Yvonne Cunningham Map Amendment MA 21-07, requesting review and approval of a map amendment to rezone from Commercial General CG to Industrial Light IL at property addressed as 2723 East 6th Avenue. Zach, hello.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, so this is a adjacent property to the others that you've looked at tonight. The subject property in this case is shown in this hatch pattern, so this would be to the west of the others that you've looked at tonight and then 2 weeks ago at Planning Commission. The subject property in this case is in the yellow polygon, so it would be to the west against that tree line. This view is looking really toward Highland Park Elementary, so the northwest. This is the street view of the building in question, or the property in question. You can just see a large metal building with a single front door. Current zoning map at the time of application indicates general commercial along the south side of 6th, essentially from where you see Henderson farther east, past Eastgate. as well as RTM public and commercial shopping. Future land use map again indicates commercial as a land use classification. Close up here indicates that on a broader scale, and the subject property is roughly in the area where the arrow points to. Questions of staff on this application?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll now open the public hearing. Those who wish to speak in favor, please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
Charlie Myers, 711 South Husband. I would just ask the commission to approve this request.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please step forward. Those opposed, please step forward. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
So, as noted with the other cases, this is very similar. There are a number of uses that are similar between the CG, general commercial, and the IL zoning districts. There are some that are more available only in the industrial zoning because of their intensive nature. The IL is a more intensive zoning district because of that. The rezoning process through the map amendment request is how we typically handle things in the land development code. Would also note in the findings that while the land use element of the comp plan indicates commercial, there are a number of people who feel there are properties that historically have been more intensive than just a simple general commercial classification. Having said that, you can accept the findings in the request and find that it's appropriate and recommend approval to City Council. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial, or if you feel additional information or discussion is warranted, you can table this item to a date certain. Questions of alternatives or findings of staff?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Discussion or motion?
I move that we accept staff findings and approve the map amendment.
I'll second that motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept the findings and recommend for approval. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is short-term rental, STR-0055. Review of application from Jennifer Swick for a short-term rental property at 5203 West 1st Avenue in the Residential Family Small Lot RSS District. This has been tabled from the June 1st Planning Commission meeting, coming back. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. As noted, this was deferred to this meeting from June 1st at the request of the Commission to allow for additional discussion between the applicant and their neighbors over the objections and concerns. The subject property, as you may remember, is here in the hatch pattern along First. This would be to the west edge of the community. There was an objection petition that was circulated before the June 1st Planning Commission meeting. The properties that signed on to that petition are noted in the green. It was not anywhere over 51% of the adjacent property owners objecting to that. Questions of staff?
Questions of staff? No.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Then I will now open the public hearing. All those who wish to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. If the applicant is here, that's appropriate.
Thank you very much. I'm Jennifer Swick. My residence is 1408 Northwest 187th in Edmond. The property that we're discussing is 5203 West First Avenue, and we addressed this application for short-term rental 2 weeks ago, and you had suggested that we come and talk with the neighbors. We had a meeting a week ago with 5 residents came to my home, and we talked. I addressed a lot of their questions and hope that I answered them to their advantage or agreement. So I agreed to change some things in my booklets, and I agreed to change like the parking in the driveway, express that they should park in the driveway and not so much in the street, and try to eliminate parking in the street. I agreed to mention the speed limit in the neighborhood, and that there are several children that are playing in the area, so that they need to be aware of that. We also exchanged phone numbers so that if they felt that they needed to contact me, then they could do so if they felt to do that. We stressed to them that it was a family business. It wasn't a corporation that was coming in here. My daughter and I manage the property together. My stepson or son-in-law comes down and takes care of garbage and checks the home because he works in Perkins, so he's close by and he can come and check on things. We're also talking about installing some outdoor cameras around the area to make sure that if there's any problems, we'd be aware of them as well. So I felt that we put the residents at ease. I hope that we did. And I think that's really all I have to say. I just hope that you find it that I'm trying to do everything I can to help to make them happy and continue with the business that I'm trying to do. So,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Questions for the applicant? Well, she's up. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Cynthia Vandenberg, 1408 Northwest 187th in Edmond. I'm the applicant's daughter. I manage all of the tenants that come in and out, so I have all of the communication with them as far as approving the tenants or denying them, and all the communication about the house rules, how they enter the home, everything like that. So I just wanted to speak on it a little bit. I was at the meeting that happened with the neighbors. They had valid concerns. We talked about everything. I felt that we addressed everything they needed, and we asked them to give us feedback and what we could do to put their mind at ease, and so they gave us recommendations that have been mentioned by Jennifer already. That was about all I had. I did agree to the initial contact when I send the tenants the information on how to access the home, that I would stress the speed limit and parking in the street at that time right before they check in, so that it's just another reminder along with the rules that are already in place for renting the property. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Stan Kidder. I live at 5105 West First Avenue. And as the property owner said, we did have a frank discussion with some neighbors and some of her associates, including a realtor. And I do think that she's made some important changes to the house rules that we have requested regarding notifying renters about property and traffic and safety issues, such as opposed to speed limit, as she mentioned, and especially watching out for children who play. We appreciate her efforts to deal with their concerns. We especially like that the Airbnb was operated by a family instead of an LLC or some other corporate entity. Further, we have opened up a channel of communication, as she said, to help address future concerns as they arise. However, we would inform the city manager if and when any such concerns cannot be resolved among us. Nevertheless, I'd like to point out that neighbors are still concerned about some issues that are inherent with an Airbnb in the middle of a neighborhood. For example, the owner noted that most rentals will be on weekends related to OSU sports and events. One resident noted that in 4 months, neighbors could have to deal with 16 different sets of renters who they don't know, rather than one family that they do know with a normal rental. Another example is the owner noted that 8 people staying there could represent 4 couples. I noted that this also could represent 4 cars. Another resident noted that there were 4 large trucks pointed at parked on the street to an Airbnb in Windsor, which is a block away, that the applicant also owns, and you could barely get through the street. In addition, a resident noted that the renter who's now at the First Avenue property was already speeding through the neighborhood. The owner did say that she would talk to the resident and caution them about speeding. Overall, an Airbnb, I believe, is still basically a motel occupied by strangers in the middle of a single-family residential neighborhood. It's basically been 2 years since the city adopted the short-term rental ordinance that was passed on an emergency basis. And I urge the Planning Commission and the City Council to revisit this issue and make changes to that ordinance that better deal with the concerns of neighborhood families that live there. For example, Colorado Springs now has an ordinance that they changed since you've adopted the short-term rental plan here, and in that it says that a single family must own the property there and must live there at least a half a year. It's sort of a shift. I had sent to you basically an editorial that was in the Colorado Springs Gazette. It's pretty unusual for a newspaper to have an editorial on that topic, but it was an important topic to the issue. And one of the things they pointed out is that the natures of Airbnbs has changed recently. Instead of someone fixing up the basement or whatever, now it's basically buying the homes with the express purpose of doing an Airbnb. And as they pointed out, that sort of changes the dynamic, especially for the neighbors that live there. Denver requires an Airbnb to be the owner's primary residence, again, getting along the same line of thought. I believe that long-term residents have invested their time and their money in the West Park neighborhood there, and they've been there for years, and they built a permanent neighborhood for their children, and it's important that they need protecting too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
Hello, I'm Sharon Schonthaler. I live at 5110 West First.
Could you bring the microphone up closer to yours? You can pull it forward for yourself or bring it down.
All right, how does that sound?
That'll be perfect. Thank you,
Okay,
ma'am.
good. So Sharon Schonthaler, 5110 West First. I do thank the Planning Commission for letting us speak again on this, and I agree with Jennifer. We have met with them. We have talked about several things, but after talking about trash carts and driveway parking, a deeper issue remains. What recourse do a long-term homeowner have to protect their property values and their investment in the neighborhood? As well as a loss of community, the neighborhood environment can change rapidly when short-term rentals are allowed. It was disheartening to realize there was very little a long-term or even short-term homeowner could do to prevent a short-term rental from entering the neighborhood if the proper paperwork was completed. What about our rights on our investments? Other cities are dealing with the Airbnb trends, as Stan mentioned, and we shared the editorial with you. One quote in the editorial states, "Residential zoning provides the stability needed for people to invest enormous amounts of money in places to call home." The article also addresses another category of short-term rentals called non-owner occupied. That was non-owner occupied, which is a short-term rental in which the owner lives in for less than 185 days a year. Stillwater's short-term rental ordinance is relatively new. We were informed the Planning Commission reached out to other cities when deciding on the short-term rental requirements. I do feel long-term homeowners are not being allowed the benefit of their investment in this city under the current short-term rental ordinance. I would urge the Planning Commission to limit the number of short-term rentals to add requirements for short-term rentals to separate them from a motel business, and to continue to research how other cities are handling this trend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
Okay, so the way the short-term rental ordinance is written, when there's an objection, the matter comes before you similar to the SUP process. So you are essentially able to agree with the application for the short-term rental and allow it to proceed, or you are able to recommend if there are modifications, you can propose that, or you can just deny the application. The code does allow for an appeal process. If someone disagrees with your decision, they are allowed to go before this, take it as an appeal to the city council. Questions of staff?
I see no questions. Thank you, sir. Councilors?
Some new. Are these common? Have we done a lot of these? Issued a lot of these?
I don't know how many we've issued over the last 2 years overall.
Since the ordinance was adopted, there are roughly 55, 57 permits that have been issued that
kind of an
staff
adjustment
knows of.
So 0055 means it's the 55th. Is that? So that would be just. So about 55.
Do you know have you rejected any of these?
I think there was one or two.
There was one because there was concern about the condition of the property within.
But it came back.
Right,
and then
came
it was
back
approved.
and we approved it.
Yeah, the city council sent it back to us, so. But that's just my hair, trying to remember. And I believe that there was, one of the comments said that the planning commission decided on the rules, but I don't believe that that's the case. We were assigned the responsibility of taking these and evaluating these, but we didn't put the form together. We didn't do this piece of it. We were just said, here's something you guys get to handle with regard to these. So we look at them as like special use permits. So we've generally evaluated them based upon the circumstances of each and every one individually in and of itself, in the situation, the neighborhood, the people, the things around it, the comments and things of that sort, generally. That's not much help, but that's kind of how we've been doing it.
Well, I'll just throw this comment out there. The one time I did stay in a Airbnb type situation was in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is neither here nor there, but the owner did occupy and live in the structure, so they have a sense of buy-in to what happens on that property. Whether or not that would be a reason for the city council and staff to revisit the ordinance, I don't know, but I can see how that would be a concern, having an absentee landlord, even if it's not a LLC or a corporation.
I stayed in a short-term rental last week in Texas, but it was a corporation, I think it was condos, that were carved out specifically for that purpose. It was like a hotel where there was my neighbors I knew were also short-term rentals.
So in other words, it was different than being embedded in a residential neighborhood.
Exactly.
I think that, the city created this to try to get a handle on what had been largely an unmanaged process in the city. There are more short-term rentals in the city than have given us applications. I think I would be fair in saying that. And so I think that the intention, hard to speak of the intention, but I believe the intention was that by having some sort of an application, there would give some recourse for when things are not working out from the city side to say, you know, acceptance or not. Now, so when an applicant, so if an applicant does fill out the information and does do the forms and does do those things, at least prima facie, that helps with the sense that they're at least trying to follow the requirements as given to us here. But the neighborhood, I don't think there's been a neighborhood yet where people are like, yeah, we love it. You know, I don't think there's been any residential neighborhood that has had short-term rentals that said, we really desire this thing. So there's this quandary in our mind. We have spoken from the commission to ask the city council to give us a little better frameworks for within to work in, but that has not happened as of yet. So that's sort of just, you know, like I said, where I stand in these things.
Well, being fairly new to the commission, it's nice to have the background and kind of know where things have gone. So while it sounds like 2 years, even given the pandemic, perhaps this is a good time to go back and ask city council if they would mind revisiting the code and give us some feedback on, do they think it's working well, or should we do something different? So I think that would be a good time to go back and kind of reassess where we are. Nevertheless, what's before us at the moment is a special use permit for the short-term rental application. And you know, I have to commend the applicant for taking the time to going and meeting with the residents. I think we had 7 or so that had 7 households. I looked at the addresses, so about 7 households that had signed the opposition.
Yeah, objection, yes.
And it sounds like you met with the majority of those. Also, it sounds like from staff that less than a majority of the neighbors who were notified have responded. Given that, at this time, I feel like I could be in favor of approving the request, approving the application as submitted.
Okay. And I believe it's my understanding that after this, it does go up to city, it goes to city council at the next city council meeting as well. Is that correct? Whatever our decision is here?
If your decision is appealed, it would go before city council.
Okay, thank you. So, do we have a motion then? Or any more comment? I don't mean to reject comment.
I will say, I guess, the comment that I'm not a fan of this. I don't like it, but I feel like that the applicant has done everything she needs to do. She's done absolutely all due diligence, and so with the current structure of the agreements, that I thought this is appropriate. So I'll move to accept the application from Jennifer Swick for short-term property at 503 West First Avenue. And accept the satisfied.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept the short-term rental application from Jennifer Swick at 5203 West First Avenue. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is the meeting summary for review and possible action. The special meeting summary of the May 4th meeting. Do we have a motion or any changes that need to be made?
I'll move that we accept the special meeting summary from May 4th.
I second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept the special meeting summary of May 4th, 2021. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
And the next item in the agenda is miscellaneous items from staff, planning commissioners, or city attorney for discussion and possible action. Doesn't look like any. Our next planning commission meeting will be July 6th, 2021. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you.